So just very quickly, for facilitators, if you can collect all the keypads at your table, and for those tables that don't have a facilitator, if you can pile them all at the center of the table, that would be very helpful. So we're going to do Q&A for about 20 minutes, and so this is what I would ask, all right? We want to get in as many questions as we can, which means that we're restricting it one question per person, and if you could make it as concise as possible, it'll make it much easier to cover as much ground as possible. Essie wanted to, she's had a number of questions around FAA. She wants to quickly share what that is.
So we understand that we've had a number of questions around what is policy FAA, and I know we've talked about that. Policy FAA is the Board of Education's policy that governs educational facilities planning. FAA doesn't actually stand for anything, but the board policies all have a lettering system that organize them into categories. So that's the shorthand, is policy FAA. It's called Educational Facility Planning. And what it does is it governs all of our planning for when we construct buildings, our enrollment projections, how we address
Is this part of the 20 minutes?
Planning concerns. I'm just answering questions. So I just wanted to say that it covers the entire spectrum of planning related to our capital improvements program.
Right. And if folks can say their name before they ask the question.
My name is Jing Wang. So my first question is, why does your pen doesn't work? I'm just kidding, it's ridiculous. We spent $475,000 and the pen doesn't work. But anyway, so can you go back to the traffic slide? I have a question on the traffic. Can you go back to the slide? It's in the very beginning.
Can you just ask your question about traffic? I'm not sure what.
Yeah, I need to see the slide because you have some information. Yeah, okay. So you said traffic was not included because it has multiple factors. Is that right?
Would you like me to answer about traffic, or was there more to your question?
So why traffic is not included?
So traffic is an important factor. Clearly. The reason we said traffic is not included, we will be looking at traffic as an element of geography and proximity. It relates obviously to how close schools are to each other and how close neighborhoods are to schools. When we do a traffic analysis, that is typically part of a boundary study where we're making specific recommendations to reassign students from school to school. In those cases, we can do an actual travel time analysis of the difference between going from point A to point B or point A to point C.
So
that's
how about to the
I'm sorry, let me
school?
finish. Let me finish for a moment.
Yeah, but
so that's how we do.
It doesn't answer my
I'm
question.
sorry. Excuse me. I'm going to finish answering this question briefly.
It just doesn't. I thought you were trying to answer my question, and I appreciate this opportunity, for me to answer. I have a question on this slide. I don't have a question. I already saw the video that I already know exactly what you're trying to say. Because
take the microphone.
I have a question on this slide. I haven't get a chance to ask my question.
I would like to answer questions in an orderly fashion. I understand that you may know where I'm going to go, but other people
I know exactly where you're trying to go. You're trying to say it's not the boundary study, and we haven't made the decision on the boundary yet. I know that. So my question is, you said here it's not a length. Traffic is not a length.
That is not acceptable. That is not acceptable.
I have a question here on this side of the room. Hello, we have a question over here.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. This is not a policy question. This is not pontification. So there is a concern that the Board of Education is providing the consultants WXY cherry-pick data for analysis. So the question is, will the final report identify all the data sets used in the analysis?
We certainly can identify the data sets. Yes, absolutely, we can identify the data sets in the report. Yeah, go ahead.
This question is in regards to the proximity lens. I live in the Olney area, and my old house The closest school was 2.4 miles away, but my children were going to be sent to a school 3.6 miles away. That's a mean average of 1.2 differential. However, I'm not sure if the proximity study showing the closest school kept in mind any kind of mean differential. In that case, when it's 1.2 miles different, it really should be excluded from the numbers. And my request would be for a mean average of perhaps a 2-3 mile differential. As well, I'm not sure if magnet schools were included in those numbers. And the concern is that I believe that you have good faith, but when it goes to the BOE and the council, I'm not sure how they might look at those numbers. So I'm curious as to whether magnet schools were measured in the proximity lens and whether or not there was a mean differential in travel.
Sure. So I think that's a great question. I think one of the things that we'll be looking at when we look at the same factor that we looked at today will be to start looking at not just one, but perhaps sort of 2 or 3 sort of closest schools and try and sort of really put that in perspective. Again, that was one of the feedback that we got from one of our previous meetings, and yes, it is well taken. And the second question, I'm sorry, I got distracted there. The second question around sort of choice and magnet programs, well, the maps that you saw today were sort of, they excluded choice and magnets, specifically because one, it's sort of, we wanted to make sure that we first get a base understanding, and that was with general ed students, but our interim report and final report will actually have, again, choice and magnet programs as part of it.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Hello.
Where?
Hi, my name is Eric Schreier. I'm a senior in Hartford, and I don't know why it's raining. But this is all fantastic data. Is it going to be online somewhere where we can interact with it and see which schools in particular those clusters are highlighting?
Yes, that is part of sort of our phase 2, because we really want people to understand not just these maps that you saw on the screen, but all the analysis.
Yeah.
To be able to sort of click through, really put things in perspective, and yes, I think the short answer is yes.
Okay,
Sorry, I got too excited there.
Hi, I commend you guys for these information gathering efforts. One question I had is looking at the student demographics. Do the demographics of the information that you're gathering, do they look like the student population in the county?
I'm sorry, was the question around student data gathered?
Meaning, what I'm asking is, do the people showing up to the meetings and providing you information, does the demographic of us look like the demographic of the students in the county?
Right, so I think the way that we are going to address that in phase 1 as well as phase 2 is to really start looking at certain targeted groups and really start and sort of, again, meet people where they are, right? Like I mentioned that at the start of this presentation, there might be several community members who cannot attend events such as this one. And I think we want to make sure, again, we want to be objective, we want to make sure we reach out to them, we include their voice in this process as well. So that answer is yes.
I'm sorry, if I can add one
We have
thing.
one here.
I just wanted to add that these are not the only meetings where we'll be having feedback. There are other ways folks can provide feedback to us as well.
So thank you for the presentation. I had a couple of questions, and this is more related. Okay, I'll make it all in one. The facility utilization has numbers associated with it, which is 80 to 100%, and you have, MCPS has policies for walkability, which is 1 mile to ES, 1.5 to middle school, and 2 for walkability, as long as wide sidewalks are there. However, you are bringing up diversity, especially socioeconomic diversity, where there are no numbers or numerical thresholds that would say, okay, this is the right number that we are looking at. Facility utilization has 80 to 100. You can easily say, okay, this is red, this is blue. Okay, but if you're using SES as a criteria, then we hope WXY will be able to provide numerical numbers saying this is the trigger that's going to be unacceptable farms or acceptable farms for any given school. And the same thing goes for proximity. We don't know what is the numerical threshold for your analysis, which should be statistically based with robust variance and other analyses that go with these kind of studies. There is no policy or thresholds that I have seen in the WXY proposals that talk about the proximity thresholds that will say, okay, this is too far, or this is acceptable bus drive, or this is acceptable distance for a child to go.
Right. So I'll try and sort of answer that question in one go if I can. So one of the things that the report will outline is it will outline sort of the variety of standards that we are looking at. Some of it will be sort of national best practices, some of it will be MCPS and board defined, and it will be again articulated in that. For some of the other things, like for example, whether 48% is right or 58% is right, well, the answer is that there is no right answer. I think the idea for us here is to start looking at this data in relation to each other. So if you might remember from the farms sort of analysis or ever farms analysis, we just looked at what is the cluster average and where are you with that. It doesn't mean one is better, one is worse off, but again, when we start to look at ever farms, that particular analysis in conjunction with sort of proximity, in conjunction with utilization, what does that tell us? And I think those are some of the questions that we want to focus through this analysis and through this report.
Yes, question. You keep using farm rate as a factor for diversification. To me, that's a misrepresentation. And the way you're cherry picking the concept, how can we, the people, make sure in the final report you're not cherry picking our results? We have feedback forms in every table. Can you present all the raw data in your reports so we can examine the result and recommendations?
Sure, thank you for that question. So I think I'll answer it in two parts. Number one is that A, we are not cherry picking data. B is that ever farms will be one of I'm going to say 4 to 5 different things that we'll be looking at within sort of diversity analysis. So again, the idea is to look at all these things in relationship to each other.
We want to see those.
And the last part is sort of, it has certain legal implications, and I'll let MCPS answer to that, but some of them is student level data, which may have sort of very discrete information, and I think that gets into some of the legal issues, so.
Okay, we have a question here. Yeah, hi everyone, I'm an immigration here, and I also consider myself as like a minority. And also right now, given the analysis right now, we are saying, okay, we don't give any recommendation about boundary study, right? So we basically just data collection and data analysis. And also given the mission of Board of Education, it's just to provide every kid very good, great public education. So given these two reasons, there are some assumptions we need to make sure we're collecting enough data before we move into the phase 2. So given that, think about when we say what is a great education system, that always relates to a lot of factors. So the assumption here need to be re-evaluated to make sure we're collecting those information at the same point, at the same time when we do the boundary study. Another point is that when we do the boundary study, the basic common sense is that sometimes kids need to busing. So that's very, very important for us to collecting the traffic data. When you say the nearest school, what is called nearest school? What is the time? What is the distance? Sometimes 1 mile takes 10 minutes. Sometimes 1 mile takes 30 minutes. So we want that information. Understand what is going on over there. I appreciate the comprehensive analysis happening here. I think that is a good start, but we need more data. I would say in the D15, in the New York boundary study, that involved 30,000 students. You spend at least, for hearing study, 80 stakeholder meetings with them. Right now, guess what? How many students we have here? We have 160. Do we put the same effort to collecting the data? I understand that WXY, for the check data, you have trouble to collecting them, that's volatile. But I think BOE, if WXY cannot collect it, we should consider another vendor to conduct that process. Yeah. That is vital.
You guys looked at the real estate that you currently have in a way to maximize it, in the sense that you have these big schools that you can build on top of and add more people to. And yet, you want to bus people around, and that makes no sense. It does have an impact on our roads. It does have an impact on infrastructure. How much money would it cost to put fuel in all those buses? to move them around, to maintain them? What does it do to the kids when you have all this huge real estate? Old days you built out. Now today you build up. I mean, that's just the way you do it. You're an architecture firm. You should know how to build up.
I get your point, and I think that's
Outside the box.
We have a question here.
So, you have a question, but clarification. No one that I know can find any information about these additional engagement meetings that are being discussed. And there are people who haven't been able to engage and ask the questions they want to. I would ask that WXY and the board make public what these additional engagement opportunities are, so people who want to provide feedback and interact can actually do it. It keeps getting discussed, but there's no detail. So my actual question is, we're talking about emphasizing diversity and some amorphous benefits of diversity. When you're thinking about balancing diversity, is any consideration being given by WXY or, quite frankly, MCPS of potential adverse impacts of emphasizing diversity, factors such as that might lead to reduced education success, such as breaking up communities, reduced parent involvement because schools are further, the lack of the access to a community school, because you don't have one anymore because it's the other side of the county, a 45-minute drive, less access to after-school enrichment. Are those factors being considered at all, and how that might be impacted when you're doing things to emphasize diversity that might have collateral negative effects?
So I think at the core of that question, you're asking about busing. And again, I just really clear up some misinformation that we keep hearing over and over again. This analysis is not about busing, it's about looking at the county and looking at adjacency. I mean, you can say that it's busing as often as you want, but again, this is about looking at the boundaries, looking at where there's capacity issues, looking at where there's geography issues, looking at around stabilization where students have been moved, and looking at diversity. And we're gathering this data so that the board can make future boundary studies. So right now there are 4 boundary studies going on, correct? And we just had the Clarksburg-Seneca Valley boundary study. Boundary studies happen all the time. In fact, since 1985, there have been 131 boundary studies in Montgomery County.
There are 10,000 earthquakes in California. What does that matter?
You have not answered my question.
All the time in Montgomery County, and you know what? It's turned out just fine. We are a successful school system. So again, I just encourage you. I encourage you not to fall into the trap of calling this a busing plan, and really think about data and information and how it lays together.
Okay, we have a question.
Oh, you go ahead. I have a data question. I want to second the distance variance issue that this other gentleman put up as important. But we've taken a big leap here, and we've been asked to take an article of faith, Ever Farms, as a good data point. It seems contrived to me. Could we please, number one, defend Ever Farms somewhere in your analysis? Number two, compare it to farms, because that's a hard data point, not a made-up data point. And show us what it would be otherwise. And can you also articulate the other lenses that you're looking at very specifically and what they show?
Yes.
Because those are this is the linchpin of your diversity argument. That Ever Farms is good, better than farms, better than some other lens, but we don't see anything else. We don't see a defensive. Please now, you didn't want to interrupt, now you did what?
But you need to ask the question.
You've not ever defended Ever Farms in a serious academic way. You've asked us to take it as an act of faith. You've never given us the data on farms instead of Ever Farms, and I've never seen the other lenses articulated the same way as measurement tools.
I think I've captured your question.
Why?
So the point of this presentation is to provide some of the data. We don't have time to provide all of the data. We wanted to engage folks in some of the, can I please finish? Let me finish. We are absolutely, the report is going to look at diversity from a wide range of lenses. There will be Ever Farms, there will be the hard regular farms number, there will be measures of diversity, including racial and ethnic composition, language diversity. There are a wide range of diversity measures that we will be looking at and metrics we will be including. For the purposes of this presentation, we wanted to provide some data to have conversations with our community around some elements of the data. EverFarms is actually a measure that jurisdictions use. The federal government uses it, the state uses it, people do use it. It is in addition to farms. Farms captures one set of data, EverFarms captures another set of data. And again, racial and ethnic diversity and other diversity components will be gathered and measured as well. All of that will be presented in both the interim report and the final report. Again, the purpose of this evening was to share some information and begin to have a dialogue around some of the information that we would be bringing forward.
I'm still not sure how we're going to use the boundary analysis data in the end, but I'm not very convinced that you put the diversity as a factor to do your analysis. So in this book, you said that why diversity is important because it's increased critical thinking and creativity. I think that's a very empty statement. If I want to deliver some idea to somebody, I want somebody to accept my idea. I provide my rationale, my reason, and even with the data. What's your data support your statement that diversity increase creativity and critical thinking? I have one data point I can give you, which is myself, proves the opposite. I'm from China. I went to school in China until.
It's on page 46 of the booklet. That's where all the data resources are on diversity. So you can look at that instead of wasting our time.
Data sound.
Your question.
Okay, I want to hear from them. Okay.
They provided you.
Okay, so let's not interrupt each other. We're going to give respect to the questioners. I'm sorry, please let him finish his question.
Okay,
and not
so
interrupt each other.
I finished my
Finish your question, please.
my school's in China. Okay, and I came to this country legally for my graduate school. Okay, so all my classmates are with same skin color, with same social economic conditions. And then I finished my PhD degree here. You know, I think I'm creative. I think I'm critical. I have critical thinking. So where's your data to support your claim that diversity increases creativity and critical thinking?
And again, I encourage folks to look through the entire booklet that does have the links to the resources, and those are the source documents that reference how diversity impacts student performance.
Yeah, I want to address the slide you had up with the EverFarms rate of Northwest High School. You had 43%, which portrays it as a high poverty school, when in fact the farms rate is half of that, it's 22%, when it's actually considered a very low poverty school, which raises questions of how credible is your data, how credible can we trust it in making your decisions, and do you think it's going to hold up to litigation in court?
So again, we're comparing, you're looking at farms versus EverFarms.
At Northwest High School.
At Northwest High School.
Yeah.
And so based on this data, what you're seeing is a higher number of EverFarms relative to the farms that you
It's falsely portrayed as a high poverty school when it's a low poverty school.
So again, what we're trying to define is the scope of poverty and the impact on the community. There's no specific number that's going to be perfect, right? Because some people don't fill out their farms paperwork. Some people don't. I mean, there are people who don't fill out their farms paperwork because of shame. I think we all know that if you have to tell people that you're in poverty, because it's a good baseline measure that the federal government uses, the federal government uses it, the state uses it, all other resources use it as a proxy for poverty. And so we have to have some point to start. We're not going to ask people door to door what your poverty level is. What we're going to do is use a proxy, and again, everything is not a perfect measurement, but farms is a good starting point. EverFarms gives you a larger perspective because we know there is shame in filling out forms that suggest you are in poverty, and some people, if the poverty levels, if you make $1 over the poverty level, your life experience doesn't change that much, but you're not available to farm. So really think about that information. And
so you're saying neither is a credible measure then?
I mean, I'm saying they're both baseline proxy measures that the federal government uses. I mean, you can debate with the federal government if you like and say, don't use farm measures anymore around poverty. You can use it with the census too, but what we're going to use is the state and federal levels proximities for poverty. Next.
You are not certain about what to use either. I mean, why do this analysis?
So I'm going to go on a limb, and I'm going to assume that the reason we're all here is not because our schools are overcrowded, but because we're facing arbitrary redistricting based on social engineering criteria. Would that be correct? Yes. That is correct. Okay. Now, another question. We are presented several nice, reports at the back, saying that in general, within the confined bounds of a college classroom, diversity gives us strength. Okay, you guys are actually sitting on a trove of data. You just went through a major redistricting in New York, where you moved people all over the place. What we are doing, what you're proposing we do is we move forward with our data analysis and redistricting before we know what happened in New York. What I propose is that we gather data from New York and other localities to see what actually happens to the achievement gap, what actually happens to the top students because they matter to you, I'm sorry. My question is, can we please hold this off until we get data from New York and other localities that show the achievement gap?
I'm going to respond to that question, and then I do want to point out that we are past our 9:20 stop. We will take three more questions, and then we will need to transition to adjourning the meeting. So the question was around the data and the comparison of the data with actual redistricting. I do want to clarify, the boundary analysis is not redistricting in and of itself. No reassignment will be authorized or allowed as a result of this analysis. The analysis does provide exactly the kind of data that's being referenced. We actually will also include benchmarking and comparisons with other jurisdictions as part of the data analysis. It's part of our charge with our consultants is to look at benchmarking with other jurisdictions. We will bring all that data together. The board then will have the benefit of that data for any future actions that will be taken. No actions are authorized as a result specifically of this analysis. And so as a result, we will have the data before other boundary actions are taken.
I have a question.
Okay, I think my question is just in time. I was expecting someone will throw the resources to. Fortunately, I did read the first resources, farm eligibility as a proxy for property. There's not a single word ever appeared on this 40-page report. So where does your ever farm come from? Second point, you mentioned the shame factor, that students will not report or try to register as a farm, but farm is there's federal privacy law prevent you to disclose a student's farm status. When you move farm student to a remote school, that automatically exposes their status. So that's a concern.
I do want to emphasize that Ever Farms and farms are both measures. There are multiple measures that address all of the factors of our community, and we will look at multiple measures. So I do want to emphasize we're not relying on any one. We will be looking at a whole range of measures that include farms, they include Ever Farms, they will include racial and ethnic demographic characteristics, they will include language capabilities. There will be a number of lenses that we examine. Last two more questions. These are the last two questions, and then we will adjourn the meeting.
Yeah, I do have one question. The most important thing about schools, and the reason we're all here, is we care about outcomes and whether students are actually getting a good education. We know that in this county there are some schools that underperform and many that do very well. What on earth does the diversity thing have to do with student outcomes? I haven't heard that.
So I want to reemphasize the Board of Education's policy requires that we look at four things in any boundary analysis. One is geography and proximity of schools to neighborhoods. One is diversity of the student body demographic population. One is facility utilization, how under or over capacity is a building. And the fourth is stability of school assignment over time, how often an area is going through boundary changes. Those are the 4 factors that are required by policy, and as a result, those are the 4 factors that we'll be looking at this evening, and in this boundary analysis, and in every boundary study that we conduct going forward. Outcomes and student learning outcomes are also examined by the district, and I think if you go on our website, you will find our evidence of learning framework, our equity and accountability framework, and a number of accountability tools and measures that the system is using around student outcomes and student achievement. Last question.
We have a question.
Hi, I live in the Arcola Elementary School District, and per the 3 metrics that you have, proximity utilization and farms rate, my district is actually overcrowded and overutilized or underutilized, whatever it is, and has disproportionate. It fails all 3 relative to the one that's right next to it. If we have a really, really specific proposal, as I represent a homeowners association, a really specific proposal about a boundary change, will there be some forum to propose it? I understand a lot of folks have different perspectives. They may not want boundary changes, and I don't want to impose anything on anyone else and move somewhere else, but where I live in particular, a boundary change is actually warranted because you got 120% in one place and 80% in places right next to it. And the school where my kid should go is further away than the one that's right next to it. So the question is will there be a forum or mechanism to propose something really specific as homeowners, as citizens?
So we do certainly receive similar kinds of requests from areas across the county, and those are best sent into the PIO@mcpsmd.org email address so that it can be routed appropriately. Boundary requests of that nature do go through a process. I'm sorry, so the email is pio@mcpsmd.org. Thank you very much. We appreciate everyone coming out this evening. Please leave any additional questions or comments on the note card on your table. And